Hello and welcome to our webinar, ApprovalMax for Xero. My name is Rainer and I will be your host during this webinar for roughly 30 minutes. We record the webinar and you will receive a link to this recording after 24 hours so that you can review and share with your colleagues. During the webinar, please feel free to ask questions. For that, please click on the Q&A button and type your questions in there. I will answer these questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. We will start with a short theoretical overview of what's ApprovalMax all about, then jump onto the live demo to show you how ApprovalMax works and how it is configured, and we conclude the webinar with our Q&A session. Now, what is ApprovalMax? ApprovalMax powers up Xero with multi-step authorization workflows for different types of financial documents. From a financial point of view, we cover both sides of the company, accounts payable and accounts receivable. We see the two most popular workflows on the accounts payable side, and these are purchase order creation and approval workflow and bill creation review and approval workflow. That's why we will focus on these two workflows today. The core idea of the purchase order workflow is to keep purchasing out of the accounting software. It means that a purchase order can be raised and then authorized by people who do not need to have access to the accounting software at all. That is quite a big deal for many financial managers and accountants that we are talking to, because most of them do not want to have lots of people within Xero. In Xero, you have a lot of information you don't want to share with most of the people within your company. And in case you want someone to raise a purchase order, it's better be done outside of the accounting software and just sync to Xero. And that is exactly what we do. Another important thing is that each purchase order, before it's pushed to Xero, goes through a multi-step authorization workflow with rules applied. These rules can be quite different, and they need to be configured to address the needs of your organization. Let me give you some examples of such rules. You want to route a purchase order to different people based on the amount of the purchase order. If the amount of the purchase order exceeds £5,000, it should be authorized by the CFO. If the amount is below that number, it's fine to be authorized without the CFO being involved. Another example for a rule would be the usage of a tracking category field to route purchase orders to different people. Tracking category is a nice feature provided by Xero and allows to have some additional coding on line items. Tracking category could be called department or cost center or region, depending on your business specifics. The tracking option, as it's called by Xero, can then be used to route your purchase orders. For example, if a PO is related to marketing department, it has to be authorized by head of marketing, and if a PO is related to sales department, it has to be authorized by head of sales. You can easily configure such rules in ApprovalMax. Approvers and requesters are notified about all key events happening in the system. Once a purchase order is raised in the system, all approvers who need to make a decision are notified by email. Within the email, they see all the details they need for making a decision, like supplier, line items, amounts, even a preview of the approval workflow. They can make their decision right from the email. They check the details and click on reject or approve within the email notification. You will be able to see this in the live demo in a couple of minutes. We see that in most of the organizations that are not very small, there's a rule that accountants need to authorize bills prior to the payment. Accountants need to chase different department managers, sometimes C-level management regarding bills, before actually paying them. Once the number of bills is starting to grow, once the number of approvers is starting to grow, it becomes quite a time-consuming task. If you have a dozen of invoices a week or even more, for each invoice you need to find out who needs to authorize what within the company. Sometimes invoices are to be authorized by more than one person. So the accountant needs to chase the department manager, who needs to chase another person, and this will take some time. ApprovalMax automates this process. Instead of chasing these approvals manually, sending them emails, calling them by phone or Skype, you just send the bill for approval through ApprovalMax. And ApprovalMax takes care of the rest. It assigns a bill to a particular manager according to your rules. ApprovalMax sends email notifications, reminders, summary emails, and gets the approval from the approver. You can fetch bills from Xero, create the bills directly in ApprovalMax, or push bills from decks prepared to ApprovalMax. No matter how you create your bills, after the final approval in ApprovalMax, bills will be available in Xero in the status awaiting payment, without having to spend a lot of time on the process. Let me illustrate the workflows. The first workflow is purchase order creation and approval. And on a high level, we have 3 steps here. In the first step, the purchase order is created and submitted. And here we can limit the creation by various options. A popular limitation is to not allow requesters to create new suppliers. And that is, by the way, one of the drawbacks of Xero when you want a requester to raise a purchase order in there. If you have a requester in Xero, they can create purchase orders, they can create new suppliers, and they can see a lot of information they shouldn't see. In ApprovalMax, this can be changed. In ApprovalMax, you can define that a requester can select only those suppliers that already exist in Xero. You can limit requesters by defining special GL codes for them. In the second step, once the purchase order is submitted for approval, it goes through the workflow with notifications and different approval steps and different approvers. And finally, in the third step, once all approvers have approved the purchase order, it is pushed to Xero. And it could even be sent to the supplier, provided that such an option has been requested by the requester. In the last slide, before we switch to the live demo, you see the bill processing workflow. And this just looks more complicated compared to the purchase order workflow, just because there typically is one more system involved. The system is called OCR, like EasyBills, Auto Entry, Data Molino, or Dex Prepare. There are a lot of more OCR systems compatible with ApprovalMax. The OCR extracts data from the incoming invoice and pushes that data to Xero. Once the invoice is in Xero, it's time to get it authorized. ApprovalMax picks up the bills from Xero, which are in status awaiting approval, and then starts a workflow for them by applying rules and notifications. It is not mandatory to use OCR tools. It's fine even if you create your bills manually in Xero. It is only necessary that bills are in awaiting approval status. Once the workflow is completed, ApprovalMax will change the status of the bill in Xero from awaiting approval to awaiting payment. So from a different angle, you can say that ApprovalMax does a very simple thing when bills are created in Xero. We just move those bills from awaiting approval to awaiting payment status. In a different approach, you can create your bills directly in ApprovalMax or use a direct Dex Prepare connection. In both cases, the bills are created in ApprovalMax first, run through the workflow, and only get into Xero after the final approval. Bill creation in ApprovalMax and having bills pushed from Dex Prepare have some advantages against bill creation in Xero. Like in the purchase order workflow, you don't need users only for bill creation in Xero. Additionally, rejected bills will not clutter your Xero file because only approved bills are pushed to Xero. And of course, you're not limited to one of the bill creation options. You can use even all of them at the same time in your bill creation, review, and approval workflow. Let's have a look at how ApprovalMax looks like. ApprovalMax exchanges data with Xero and runs in your normal web browser. So just navigate to our homepage, approvalmax.com, and log into our web application. Before you can start working with ApprovalMax, you need to configure it. So let's go to the navigation area. And you see that we're currently working on a new navigation. The old navigation looks like this, where we have our organizations lined up under each other and all the options under these organizations, which might be a bit confusing if you have a lot of organizations in here. The new navigation looks different. The new navigation has only the selected organization in here, and all the options you have under that organization are listed in here. So each and every workflow you're integrated with and all the options below those workflows. And you immediately also see in which workflow you're allowed to create new documents. And for administrators, everything else is at the bottom of the list. You can also switch back to the old style navigation. So let's go to the approval workflows under our organization name. As said in the beginning, ApprovalMax covers both sides of the company, accounts payable and accounts receivable. And we're looking at the most popular workflows today, the purchase order creation and approval workflow and the bill creation, review, and approval workflow. You can have ApprovalMax running as a standalone workflow tool too. So create your own approval workflows, not connected to Xero at all. So everything you upload in here stays in ApprovalMax. Well, let's start with a purchase order workflow. A workflow is a sequence of steps. In the first step, requesters are able to create purchase orders, and once fully authorized, it is pushed to Xero. In our example, we have a 3-step approval workflow: the department approval step, the controller approval step, and the CFO approval step. Of course, you can rename the steps in any way you like. You can have as many steps as you need. So a single step approval will also be okay, as well as 4 or more steps. You can also rearrange the steps in any way you like. It is important to know that steps always happen sequentially. So after the purchase order has been created, everybody listed under the department approval step will receive a notification, but only according to the setup rules. And only after everybody who received that notification has given their approval, the users under the controller approval step will be notified. And you can even create rules to skip certain steps. So in our example, the CFO will not be bothered with purchase orders unless the purchase order is at least 10,000 British pounds. And imagine you have a controller department and you want just one of your controllers have a look at all of your purchase orders. In such cases, we can change the approval condition. Instead that everybody needs to approve, like in the department approval step, we switch that to any of, meaning all of the controllers receive a notification about a new purchase order request, and first comes, first serves. The first one to approve the purchase order completes the controller approval step. Now, for the configuration of these rules, we use our approval matrix. The rules define who is in charge for different steps of approvals, and for the rules, we use the categories that were created in Xero. In our example, the categories are total amount, requester, supplier, our tracking category, set up as department here, account, item, tax, and branding. Well, our rules here mainly focus on 2 categories. We have one set of rules around the total amount and the other one around the departments. Now, we have Willie. Willie needs to approve all purchase orders below 1,000 British pounds. Then we have Lucy. Lucy needs to approve all purchase orders between 1,000 and 20,000 British pounds. And finally, Peter needs to approve all purchase orders above 20,000 British pounds. Then we have the rules around the departments, where Lisa needs to approve all purchase orders created for the sales department. We have Nicholas, and that's the guy I'm using here. And Nicholas needs to approve all purchase orders that are not marked for G&A, marketing, or the sales department. And then there is a little bit more complex rule for Wolf. And Wolf needs to approve all purchase orders with line items for G&A and for marketing, as well as he has to approve the purchase orders that Lisa creates for the sales department. So he has to have a second look on them. You can easily create your own rules around any amount. Include, exclude any requester or supplier, or tie your rule to an account from Xero. Once you're done with the creation of your rules, just click on Done and continue with the next step. Once you're done with all of your steps, don't forget to save your workflow. Now, we're updating an existing workflow here, and that means we have currently purchase orders running through the system that haven't been fully approved yet. Now we need to decide what to do with those purchase orders. We generally have 2 options. We can take some or all of them and push them back to step 1. Have them start over the workflow with the changed rules. The other option would be just leave them be. Let them continue with the old rule set. And only purchase orders created after we have updated our workflow will go with a new rule set. Now, how can requesters create purchase orders? In ApprovalMax, you always have the Create New button on the top right. So even here in the workflow editor, in the workflow overview, as well as in all of the list views showing your requests, always the Create New button on the top right. So just click on it, select the purchase order from your organization, and create your request. The form is similar to the form in Xero, except that neither your requesters nor your approvers need any access to Xero at all. And you can restrict your requesters, for example, that they are not able to create new suppliers, or restrict them to only use certain suppliers. But even if they're able to create new suppliers, it will just be synchronized over to Xero. You can also make tracking categories mandatory for budgeting or reporting. So let's just add some line items, change the quantity, add some departments here. And let me just add some generic line item. Quantity here. And let's leave the department open here on purpose. You can also attach files to your purchase order. Of course, only file types are allowed that are allowed within Xero. You can also decide to automatically email your purchase order to your supplier once it's fully approved. Just tick on that checkbox if necessary, add more email addresses, and ApprovalMax will send out your purchase order completely automatic to your supplier once the purchase order is fully approved and pushed to Xero. You can also attach files to that email, and the files attached here can be different to the ones attached to the original purchase order, because you might have confidential files in here which you don't want to send out to your supplier. Once you're done with the creation of your purchase order, you can either save it as a draft or directly submit it for approval. Once submitted for approval, you see what you just created. You can edit your purchase order, copy it as a basis for the next one, or cancel your request. You also see the approval workflow, in which step we currently are, who is responsible for approving in that step, the steps that are upcoming, and the ones that have been skipped. If you remember, in the workflow rules, it said that the CFO will not be involved with purchase order approval unless the purchase order is at least 10,000 British pounds. So I stayed below that amount and got myself an automatic approval from the CFO. Additionally, at the bottom, you see the audit trail, which shows what happened within your document. As a requester, I can also add additional users to this workflow if I think the ones approving here are not sufficient for me. Now, because I left the department open here for this line item on purpose, my user is also part of the approval workflow. And as an approver, I can also add additional users to this step. And if I think I'm not the right person to approve this, I can even exchange myself with a different approver. Now, this user is special. This user is also part of the administrative group for this organization. And administrators can not only see all the requests, no matter if they are requesters, approvers, or not. They can not only see all the requests, they can also override all requests. As an administrator, I can force a final approval on this request, meaning I would bypass all these steps and all these approvals and force this document to Xero instead as approved. I could also force a rejection, where forcing a rejection is the same as a normal rejection. You enter a reason why you rejected the purchase order and send it back to the requester. But let's get this one out of the way and approved. Now, let's have a look at the bill review and approval workflow next, going back into the navigation area back into the approval workflows. Oh, let's try it with the other navigation here. Into the approval workflows in here, and into the bill creation review and approval workflow. And this is generally the same as the purchase order workflow, except that in most of the times there's another system involved, the OCR, which creates the electronic documents in Xero, leaves them in the awaiting approval status from where ApprovalMax will pull them, run them through the workflow, and after final approval, the status in Xero will be changed from awaiting approval to awaiting payment. You don't need to use OCR tools to get your documents into Xero. You can also use manual bill creation in Xero or email to bill function. Although, if you're using manual bill creation, you should do that in ApprovalMax. It spares you one additional license in Xero. Manual bill creation in ApprovalMax changes a little bit how the workflow runs. The manual bill creation creates the bill in ApprovalMax first, the same as in the purchase order workflow. We run it through the workflow, and only after final approval, the bill is pushed to Xero. The same goes for the direct connection to DEX Prepare. We can use the OCR system DEX Prepare and connect it to ApprovalMax. You see that in the organization settings, where we can just connect to DEX Prepare. If you click on it, you end up in the DEX Prepare login. Just log in with your credentials and you're directly guided to the integrations part. You just have to choose the integration software, and that's ApprovalMax for Xero. So just click on it, go through the integration checklist. You might need to configure a few things in DEX Prepare to match with your Xero configuration, then connect both of them, and that's it. So DEX Prepare creates electronic documents out of electronic bills readable for Xero out of the documents it receives. And the workflow is then exactly the same as with the manual bill creation. DEX Prepare pushes a bill to ApprovalMax. We run it through the workflow first, and only after final approval, the bill is created in Xero, either in status awaiting payment or even in status paid. Now, how do I create new bills? You can use again the Create New button, select the bill and create it, or use our new navigation where we can see here the bill workflow. Just click on the plus and the form opens up for the bill. Now, how should approvers make their decisions? As an approver, you can go through all of the lists. Let me go to the old navigation again. You can go through all of the lists, the open requests, for example, and search for the ones you need to work on, or do a direct search, for example, for an open bill. With bills, we have something special. We can match bills with purchase orders. So this is a completely manual and optional process. You can match many bills to one purchase orders. With what you normally see is one large purchase order at the beginning of the year and the fulfillment throughout the year with several bills. Or the other way around, one bill to many purchase orders, which I will show you here because it's easier to show. Where you see the matching in here, and you immediately see if you're overbilled or not. In this case, the bill amount is a lot higher than the amount of the purchase orders. The other way around, it also shows here that we can still add more bills to the purchase orders because we're not overbilled here. As I said, this is a completely manual process, and currently only full bill and purchase order matching works, so no line item matching. And as it's optional, also using the workflows is optional, meaning we have customers only using the bill workflow, only using the purchase order workflow. You don't need to activate both of them. But switching your tools logging into ApprovalMax for a simple approval might not be the best way of working. It's much easier to make your decision directly out of the notification email. ApprovalMax sends you a notification email with all the details you need. There is a link to the original request. So if you click on it, it opens up an ApprovalMax, in this case, a purchase order here. You see the supplier, the line items, the amounts, and even a preview of the approval workflow. And you can make a decision directly out of that email. Just click on reject or approve, and you're done. It's even easier if you use our mobile application. We have mobile apps for iPhone and Android available. And once installed on your smartphone, you receive a push notification about the new request. You can have a look at the details and make a decision with a tip of your fingers. So as easy as that is, we're already at the end of the webinar. Now's the time for asking your questions. For that, please click on the Q&A button and type in your questions in there. There haven't been any questions during the webinar, so while waiting for the questions to come in, I show you something else. When you have approvers in ApprovalMax, of course, they might not be able to approve because they're out of office or unavailable for other reasons. Approvers can set themselves out of office and select a delegate that will approve in their stead. And of course, if an approver is absent unplanned, the administrator can always select a delegate for a certain user. Now, no questions came in. As said in the beginning, you'll receive a link to a recording of this webinar after 24 hours. And if you read it or share with your colleagues and more questions come up, please feel free to contact our support. Best way to do that is through our product. Either your trial or your regular subscription, just click on the help button and then please on the contact support menu. I also encourage you to visit our knowledge base. So ApprovalMax.com, the knowledge base in there also has a lot of answers on questions you might not even have had. The knowledge base also includes a lot of videos showing ApprovalMax in action in several scenarios. Thanks a lot for joining today's webinar. Thanks a lot for your interest in ApprovalMax. Have a nice rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.